All right, we're ready to go.
Yes.
All right, thank you, STL TV. With that, we will call to order the Ways and Means Committee for June 24th. Sharita, please call the roll.
Alderwoman Davis,
Present.
Alderman Vaccaro,
Present.
Alderwoman Howard,
Present.
Alderwoman Hubbard,
Present.
Alderwoman Murphy,
Present.
Alderwoman Spencer, Present. Alderman Muhammad,
Here.
Alderman Oldenburg,
Which one you talking about? I'm just looking over all the rules. These are, I mean,
Alderwoman Boyd,
this one, she.
Here. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard, Chairman Ballmer,
Present.
President Reed. Alderman Oldenburg, Alderwoman Clark Hubbard, President Reed. 9 present, you have quorum.
All right. Okay, a quick note. STL TV, I know Alderman Oldenburg sent me a text. He's trying, he needs a link to get on. If you can
Okay,
send
I'll
us-
send him one.
Try and get Mr. Oldenburg on. And Mr. President, you're not muted, but I can't hear you when you're speaking. We can't hear you. So you're not, you might need to. So it might run a mic test with them because you're muted and I still can't hear you. Seeing as this is your bill, we might need to hear you. All right. While we're doing for that, we'll go through, we'll hold excuse Alderman till the end of the meeting. I'll entertain a motion for approval of minutes from Monday, June 22nd committee hearing.
So moved. Second.
Sharita, please call the roll. Sharita, please call the roll.
Alderwoman Davis,
Aye.
Alderman Vaccaro,
That's the way do request to tell them if we already capped off on
Alderwoman Howard,
Aye.
tire shops.
Alderwoman Hubbard,
Aye.
Alderwoman Murphy,
Aye.
Alderwoman
People buy property, they buy it because of the area, it's cheap or whatever. So it's kind of hard because now that you.
Alderman Muhammad,
Aye.
Man, you tell me I can't.
Oldenburg,
I'm saying, right, it's kind of hard to say.
Alderwoman
Present.
Aye. Aye.
Clark Hubbard,
Aye.
Chairman Ballmer,
Aye.
President Reed,
Aye.
All right.
Alderman Vaccaro.
I think we're going to have Alderman Vaccaro mute his mic because we're getting I'm hearing a lot of crosstalk.
Alderwoman Spencer,
Aye.
Oldenburg,
Aye.
5 votes, 1 present.
All right. Thank you very much, Sharita. I see Alderman Oldenburg's joined us. Alderman McCarl, if that's your microphone, could you please mute? We're getting a lot of crosstalk in the back. I heard the president ask for that also. Okay. What we have before us today is item number 1, Board Bill 71, introduced by President Reed. With that, I'll turn it over to the president. Please proceed.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Board Bill 71 is an ordinance submitting to the qualified voters of the city of St. Louis a proposal to add one new article to the city's charter, article number 27. If authorized, it will direct the mayor to enter into a long-term lease agreement for the operations and management of St. Louis Lambert International Airport. The proceeds will go into various different trust funds, and we will use $700 million to pay off the existing debt on the airport. We are also asking that at least a $1.7 billion offer be made in terms of entering into a long-term lease agreement with a private operator. With that 1.7 billion, as I stated earlier, 700 million would be used to pay off the existing debt, and roughly $1 billion would be used to go into various different trust funds for public safety, neighborhood development, job and vocational training, streets, bridges, parks, clean and livable neighborhoods, and city infrastructure. So a lot of people may be asking, why do we need to look at this, and why is it important to look at this? Well, first and foremost, there is a ballot initiative that is being done by an independent organization. And that ballot initiative, they currently have turned in twice the number of signatures that they need to have it be put on the ballot. So we have a simple decision, I think, but also a very immediate decision to be made here at the Board of Aldermen. Do we want our views to be part of the discussions when people go to the ballot and vote whether they're going to privatize the airport or not? We know that we have major infrastructure issues across our city, but more importantly, we are living and have lived, at least for my lifetime, with a divided city, one north of Del Mar and one south of Del Mar. The economic conditions that exist north of Del Mar and south of Del Mar are just staggering, the differences. They've been covered and studied by independent organizations and universities all around the globe, and held up as a way not to run a city, and as a major failure as it relates to race relations. For example, the median household value north of Del Mar is $73,000, where the median income is $18,000. Whereas if you go south of Del Mar, the median home value jumps from $73,000 to $335,000. And the median income jumps from $18,000 to $50,000, right? But we see those disparities, play out in health. We see them play out in access to education, access to healthcare, and on and on and on and on. So we have to address that issue. And here's what I know based on just my years of living in the city and raising 4 kids, and being a father and also an elected official. These problems aren't going to cure themselves, and they're not going to go away by themselves. It's going to take some direct action. It's going to take some economic input. It's going to take heavy economic investment. And where is that coming from? I don't know. And I don't think anybody knows where it's coming from. So the challenge that we have here in the city, and here's the point that I think, I really want everybody to understand. Most airports around the country, they reside in the county that owns them, right? So anytime there's a tax increase or taxes, that are generated from the sales of goods and services at that airport, that municipality receives that benefit. In the city of St. Louis, we are in a little bit unique situation here, where our airport actually resides in the county. So additional tax revenue that come from the airport, it goes to benefit the county, not the city of St. Louis. Meanwhile, our residents, we're saddled with roughly $700 million in debt that is carried over from the Shin administration with the runway to nowhere. But we still have to pay for it. We still carry that debt each and every day. Meanwhile, the people that need to and should benefit from the airport are seeing very little benefit from the airport at all. So there are two ways cities address this type of issue across the country, either through an all-out privatization or through a P3, public-private partnership. So if you look at airports all across the country, from LaGuardia Airport to Denver's airports all across the country, you'll see public-private partnerships at play within those airports, where they bring private investment in, and the private investor partners with the city and they run parts of the operation, and the city receives the benefit from that investment, right? And they're in airports virtually all across the country. Congress a number of years ago authorized this program that we're looking at that would allow cities to opt into working with a private operator and entering into a lease agreement, not a sale, but a lease agreement. What that does, it unlocks the revenue within an airport. Because remember, airport funds are restricted funds. They can only be used on the airport property and within the airport itself. So a better running airport, an airport with more flights and things of that nature to it, coming within it, helps the county because they get additional tax revenue, and it helps the airport. Meanwhile, we are sitting here with two separate cities, one north of Del Mar, one south of Del Mar. That will never cure itself. So I want to go through some of the trust funds and just go through a few items in the bill because it's a 25-page bill, and I haven't heard from some of the members. A lot of the members have read through most of it, or if not all of it. So I'm not going to go back through all of those items. First and foremost, a public vote. Members of the board, all last session were calling for a public vote. This is a public vote. This gives the voters of the city of St. Louis an opportunity to decide their future, to decide what is important to them, to decide if this is a good idea or not a good idea. And I think that it's important that we give them an opportunity to choose what they want to do and what their future should look like. If you go to the various different trust fund accounts, the first trust fund account that would be set up under this ordinance is a Safe Neighborhoods Trust Fund, where at least 25% of the lease proceeds would go into this trust fund, which shall be solely used for the purposes of addressing the root causes of crime and improving public safety in neighborhoods. Part of what we would do with this trust fund, because we want all these trust funds that I'm going to talk to you about today, we want to see an immediate impact of it. So what the board bill is calling out for is 50% of that initial deposit into this Safe Neighborhoods Trust Fund to be dispersed or committed within the first 3 years. The rest of the proceeds would stay within that trust fund and gain interest over time, so that the trust fund would always stay in a healthy position. The Distressed Neighborhoods Development Fund, at least 20% of the lease proceeds to be used up to $200 million, which shall be used solely for the purposes of funding new development in cities' poorest neighborhoods, including improvements to or repurposing of buildings in neighborhoods with both unemployment rates and poverty rates that are above the average of the city of St. Louis. At least 50% of it will be, again, used in the first 3 years as an opportunity to have some direct impact and immediate impact on our neighborhoods across the city of St. Louis. And the rest of the things remain the same, where the funds within the trust fund would gain interest over time, and the trust fund would stay healthy, and it would go to fund the purposes as outlined in the ballot language. The Job Training Fund, we're working on a committee substitute, right? And in the committee substitute, some of these line items here, we've had recommendations from members of the committee, other members of the Board of Aldermen who have read through it, some changes they would like to see. So one of the recommendations that I like, on this line item 3 is, instead of calling it the Job Training Fund, it would be called the Job Creation and Training and Preparation Fund, so that it's not just for job training, but it's also for creating jobs and creating a ready workforce and assuring that that ready workforce is placed within a job, right? So that's the changes that you will see in the Job Training Fund. The rest of the things remain the same, where you have 50% of that initial fund being spent within the first 3 years, and the balance being left within the fund, and which allows us to gain interest on it and have a healthy fund to continue the program in perpetuity. This next fund is the Streets, Bridges, and Parks Trust Fund. At least 10% of the lease proceeds should be used for the Streets, Bridges, and Parks Trust Fund. Should be used solely for the purpose of constructing new or maintaining existing streets, bridges, and parks, including providing matching funds for streets, bridges, and parks repair, streets and bridges repair and for parks. And again, same thing here, where at least 50% of it would be spent in the first, not spent, but either dispersed or committed. And that's for all of them, dispersed or committed within the first 3 years, with the balance remaining in the fund, gaining interest. Clean and Livable Neighborhoods Trust Fund, at least 10% of the lease proceeds to be used in this fund, which shall be used solely for the purposes of the proper environmental removal and public-owned vacant buildings. We're the biggest landlord in town and probably one of the worst landlords in town, right? This gives us an opportunity to bring relief to those neighborhoods that find that, the city owns the majority of the buildings on their block and the city's not maintaining them, right? So this will allow us to address the issues of publicly owned vacant buildings, the construction of affordable housing units, and the removal of vacant buildings that are problematic within neighborhoods and community, the preservation of historic homes and or historic properties, and for healthy home and senior home repair programs, and for so that we have funds to go in and just stabilize neighborhoods all over the city. I believe virtually every alderman would have a house or two or block or two that can use some relief that would come from this fund. And again, 50% of these proceeds in the Clean and Livable Neighborhoods Trust Fund would be committed or dispersed within the first 3 years. And the balance of it would be left in the fund for future projects, right? But we want to see some immediate impact of it. So we'd like to see it go out the door and these projects be made priority. In the Minority Business Assistant Trust Fund, at least 5% of the lease proceeds should go into this fund. This fund will be solely used for the purposes of providing low interest loans, training and assistance, and overall capacity building to certified minority and women-owned businesses licensed in the city of St. Louis, right? As a former minority-owned business, I look at this fund and think, my God, I wish I had access to a fund like this when I owned my small minority-owned business. Being able to get help with your back office issues and being able to have help with recruiting and marketing and things of that nature, those types of things can make a difference on whether that business survives and grows to be one of the new Fortune 500 or Fortune 100 businesses in America, or dies, right? This gives us an opportunity to begin to build our own Fortune 100 businesses and help those businesses grow. Public Transit Infrastructure Trust Fund. You know, I don't think I have to explain a lot about what this is, right? At least 5% of the lease proceeds to be used within this fund. This fund shall solely be used for the purposes of developing combined passenger and freight transportation and certification facilities. You know, we talk about the north-south Metrolink, right? Where's the funding going to come from for that? I think it should be clear to everybody that lives in the city of St. Louis or have lived in the city of St. Louis for all the 10 minutes. We should not be worried. We should not be waiting on the state to help us fund that. So we're going to have to find ways to put an oar in the water to begin to determine our own destiny as it relates to public transit, which is absolutely critical for a lot of families. A lot of families that will determine if they have a job, can they hold down a job, right? Can they get their kids to school? All of those things, public transit plays a major role in that. And it's also clear that we're behind the rest of the country when it comes to a very sophisticated, majorly built out public transit system. We've made absolute great strides with Metrolink, but there's still more work to be done. Technology Modernization Trust Fund, at least 4% of the lease proceeds would go into this fund, right? Which shall solely be used for the purposes of modernizing, upgrading technology in city departments and agencies. Part of another recommendation we received was to expand this to allow for it to go out into neighborhoods and communities also, so that we can build out fiber networks across neighborhoods and communities. We can invest in a smart city grid that touches every single neighborhood across the city of St. Louis, right? And we can invest in Wi-Fi, right, in neighborhoods that have been cut out or left out of the equation, right? This allows us to really begin to close the gap on that digital divide through this fund. And again, this fund, like all the other funds, 50% of it would be distributed or dispersed or committed within the first 3 years. The balance would remain in the trust fund, keeping the trust fund healthy and allowing us some funds for future projects, right? Small Business Revolving Loan Trust Fund. As you all know, I said a minute ago, I used to be a small business owner, minority owned business, right? This is another one of these funds that would have made a massive difference in my business. And if you talk to small business owners that are out there struggling to make ends meet each and every day and trying to find their place in the marketplace, they'll tell you the same thing about this fund. So this Small Business Revolving Loan Trust Fund, at least 1% of the lease proceeds, up to $10 million, will be put in this trust fund. The fund shall be solely used for the purposes of funding or collateral for low interest loans up to $100,000 to small businesses licensed in the city of St. Louis, right? That can make a massive difference in our small businesses and the success of our small businesses. The majority of our economy in the city of St. Louis is run on the backs of small businesses. So we help uplift those small businesses, stabilize those small businesses. It helps our bottom line, our income, right? Our revenue streams, right? Which helps us have a healthier, better, stronger city for all the people who call St. Louis home. And again, this small business fund is the exact same thing as the other trust funds I talked to you about. At least 50% of the initial deposit of small business revolving trust fund will be dispersed or committed within the first 3 years. So we have just a really direct impact and a nice stimulus, hit from from this fund being put in place also. And then the balance of that fund would be set aside and would go into, would be held for interest and things of that nature, and allows us to do other things in the future. I also want to say that every single one of these funds that I'm talking about, there will be, and we're also calling for regular audits to be done on these funds. And the audits will be made public so people understand what the funds have been used on, what the outcomes were, what the success of the projects were that were involved in these funds, how healthy the funds are, how much interest we've gained on them, and the balances in all of these funds, right? That will all be public information and transparent, right? So, you know, finally, the essentials reserves trust fund. So this fund is being put in place in case we have this sort of an event. In the event that the city receives any payment from a lease more than 120 days after the closing, or after the closing of said lease, the payments of that payment will go into this reserve trust fund. So we're putting that in place in case payments come after that lease expires, right? And the same thing on that fund also. You know, we have also in this ordinance, we've put in place protections for all the employees. So if you have a collective bargaining agreement that you've negotiated and a lease operator comes in, that collective bargaining agreement stays in place, right? If you are employed by the airport, right, and whatever your job title is, you can choose to keep that same job and same job title with the same pay, right? And move over to that lease operator, right? And also, I don't know if many people know, but when we look at our airport and we look at all the employees out there, a lot of times people think that all those employees are city employees. And they talk to it when they say, how can we trust that the airport is going to be run in a professional manner? And how can we trust that the airport is not going to, it is going to be as safe as it is today? Well, of the 6,000 employees that run the airport, only about 10% of them are city employees. So we're only looking at 500 to 600 of that 6,000 that are city employees. The rest of those employees are TSA employees. They are airline employees, right? So when the people that are putting the baggage into the planes, they're airline employees, right? The security people that are watching the gates, and it's all TSA employees. They're not City of St. Louis employees. Part of the provisions that we have in this ordinance is that the city maintains control over its own police department and police that are within the airport, and we still have jurisdiction within that airport. So the St. Louis City Police Department that currently patrol that airport will still be part of it, but controlled and on our payroll and our police officers. And the exact same thing with the firefighters. We've put in provisions for assuring that any organized labor body that's out there has a labor peace agreement in place, right? And if you go from pages 18 to probably 22, 23, all of that covers the labor peace agreement side, right? And specific requirements in there for any lease operator to honor all of those organized labor bodies that we have negotiated with in good faith and have worked with for numerous years at the airport, who obviously want to assure that they have a place moving forward, right? So it's an extensive section. I invite you all to read through it and to ask any questions that you may have related to it. everything's in there, including OSHA standards and the requirements to follow that. On-site employees shall mean any labor, worker, driver, equipment operator, craft persons employed by any contractor, subcontractor, or engaged in construction on the site of any construction project within the airport. So we've really gotten into great detail within this ordinance to assure that there are protections in place for everyone who works at the airport. So even up to and even including, let's say you work at the airport and you are an account manager or whatever your job is, right? And you're employed by the city, right? And you've been working there for 15 years. If you decide to go on with whoever the private lease operator is, you would maintain your entire work history, right? So when you go on with them, you would maintain that 15 years. You wouldn't start as a new employee, right? So we put provisions in there that have requirements on the lease operator for that. If the lease operator wants to transfer their lease agreement to a third party, right? There are provisions in this ordinance that requires the approval of ENA, that requires the approval of the airlines and the FAA. So they would have to go back to all of those checks and balances to do that, right? And with that, I'll take any questions that you might have. But the one piece that I think is really important for everybody to truly understand is how aggressive of a minority and women-owned business inclusion plan we put in place within this ordinance, right? It's something that we have never done to the level we have in this ordinance that can be transformative to a lot of small minority and women-owned businesses in the city of St. Louis. And it continues to increase over time the percentages that the leasee would have to meet under this contract. And if the leasee did not meet the minimum guidelines, the minimum requirements on the minority and women on inclusion plans within this ordinance, they would be forced to pay out to the city of St. Louis the balance of the lost revenue that minority and women-owned businesses did not get a chance to take advantage of. They would be forced to pay out that balance to the city of St. Louis, which would go into a fund to help, promote and stabilize and give assistance to minority and women-owned businesses. So it has major teeth in it so that, they can't say, well, we tried and it just didn't work out. And if they say, well, we tried and it just didn't work out, we'll say, okay, we understand that, write us a check so that we are sure that you are going to make sure that it's a priority the next time. We're also pushing to get this on the November ballot. I think it's important that it's on the November ballot. And then it gives us an opportunity to move the process forward. But finally, again, what we're doing here, a vote on this from a board's perspective isn't a vote that says, yay, I support privatizing the airport. But what it is a vote to say, I think it's important enough, it's an important enough issue that the people of the city of St. Louis deserve the right to vote on it, to have a decision on it, right? It's an important enough issue that when I look at these struggling families across the city of St. Louis, and if we have an opportunity to transform them and the voters would like to see that, we should give them the opportunity to see that, to do that, right? So that's what this is. And given the number of people that said they wanted a public vote last year, we should have no problem having a whole lot of co-sponsors on this bill and seeing it go to the voters and giving the voters an opportunity to speak out. We have to meet a 60% majority on this. So it's not an easy thing. But one thing's for sure, the voters will be voting on whether they want to privatize the airport or not. And the city of St. Louis and the Board of Aldermen, we have to make a decision on if we want to be part of that discussion or not. If we want a bill on that ballot that reflects our values, that reflects our experiences, our understanding of what our constituency needs. So that's what this is about. And with that, I'll take any questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. President. We'll go through the committee. Vice Chair, Alderwoman Davis. You need to unmute.
Okay, here I am.
Yes, dear. All right, thank you. Please proceed.
And Mr. Chairman, I forgot one thing. I do have Dr. Hollins, and there was 3 points I would like him to cover. And with your indulgence, I'd like him to cover those 3 points first. And then
you would like to do that at this moment?
Yes, because then there may be questions of both of us or either of us along the way.
Madam Vice, you mind if we proceed with Dr. Hollins?
Absolutely not. Go right ahead, please.
All right, thank you so much. Dr. Hollins, it's your show. Please proceed.
Thank you, Chairman Vollmer. And there are really 3 major points, and one has already really been covered by President Reed, is that one, the city of St. Louis sits in a very unique situation in that we are the owners of Lambert Airport, but the airport does not sit in our taxing jurisdiction. And that creates a lot of challenges for us. You know, what you've seen in a lot of other airports with P3 arrangements, and really the P3 arrangements really tied to the terminals. And that's where a lot of your sales tax revenue is generated, is from the terminals. And when you think of a terminal at an airport, really all a terminal at an airport is a mall with high security that connects to planes. And so when you go through a lot of modern airports, they're actually set up like modern malls. And actually, if you're familiar with Westfield, the mall operator, they actually manage terminals as well, airport terminals. And so when you see a lot of P3 arrangements around the country, it's to run terminals. And the reason that is of advantage to a lot of other cities like New York and Atlanta, some of your major airports, is that operator can invest capital into that terminal and generate more sales, which then the city or the owner of the airport receives through sales tax. So your incentives are in line with that P3. If we were to have that type of arrangement in Lambert, that would benefit St. Louis County and I believe the 6 municipalities that the airport sits in. And so if you set up a P3 to run a portion of the airport, particularly the terminals, we would not benefit from that, which is unique. And so that's a very important point, and that limits what you can do at the airport to benefit the city. The second part is really capital. Over the next 20 to 30 years, there are going to be some major capital needs for the airport. The airport has roughly $700 million in debt. That is being paid down at a very accelerated rate. And I think a big portion of that will be paid off in the next 10 years when we pay off the large runway project. But you have to remember, we're probably going to have to reinvest that capital into the terminals. One of the big differences as far as funding for airports, it's that you can get a lot of federal support for your airfields, right? So your runways, things of that sort. But you can't get help for your terminals. That falls kind of on the operator of the airport. And a lot of your P3 costs are redoing the terminals. So if you look at, I think Kansas City is redoing their terminals and they're north of $1 billion. And so we're going to have, large capital outlays, particularly over probably the next 30 years, thinking about those terminals. And then think about Terminal 1, which is the original terminal that was built in the early 50s. So, do we think Terminal 1 is going to make another 20 or 30 years, right? It's already, over 50 years old. And so how many airports do you know that are still operating out of their, one of their original terminals that was built shortly after World War II? And so either we're going to have to spend enormous amounts of money maintaining that terminal as it deteriorates, or you're going to have to build a new terminal, which what you're seeing around the country. And so the capital expenditures, you know, if you think about how you finance an airport, it's obviously through long-term debt, and that's based on the revenues of the airport. You know, or is the airport going to be able to support that kind of debt over the long term, and can the city even contribute to that? And that's a big question that's got to be answered by the city and the airport. And then finally is the airport complex as a whole. So the airport complex as a whole is obviously massive. It's about 4,500 acres. But what's unique about Lambert is, of the 4,500 acres, 2,100 acres are outside of what we call the fences. So the fences are basically where the air traffic takes place. So that's the secure area. So that's basically 2,100 acres that can be developed, right? And obviously that land development takes capital, which we're capital restrained, right? So that's an enormous economic opportunity for the region, right? Now, because again, going back to the first point, because the airport doesn't sit in the city, all that economic development would actually benefit the municipalities in the county, because those developments would be in those jurisdictions. But with a privatization, you can structure a deal where the city could benefit from that. And also, again, capital, right? You need capital to develop. So in theory, we could sell off the land, right? But if we sell off that land, that revenue from selling the land would just go sit on the airport's balance sheet. It couldn't be transferred to the city. And so, and if we don't have capital to put into the deal to develop it ourselves, and the airport doesn't have the capital, then the land will just sit barren. And so again, you know, the economic development opportunities are enormous when you're talking about 2,200, 2,100 acres sitting next to a major American airport. That is well positioned. We're in the center of the country, which we're like 2.5 hours from anywhere in the country. We have enormous capacity, meaning we can take on more flights. We can land any kind of aircraft you would want to at the airport, particularly because of the long runway. I mean, you can land a 747 fully loaded with cargo in a rainstorm. A lot of airports don't have a runway big enough to do that. And now you have the land to develop cargo, office, hotels. I mean, how many airports have hotel and conference centers connected to them? Again, because of the way we're structured and not the airport not sitting, you know, in our jurisdiction, we couldn't benefit for that under the current structure, but a privatization would allow you to do that. But, you know, going back to the first point is, and I mean, that's why you haven't seen privatizations at a lot of other airports in the United States, because they can benefit from development and at their airport through sales tax, right? Because an airport terminal is not much different than a mall, right? And if you think about the modern design of most airports, you go in through one entrance and they force you through a bottleneck through security, right? And they funnel you through almost like an entertainment area with restaurants and shopping to basically get you to spend more money. And then they send you out to the terminals and then to get you to spend more money there, right? And so it's almost like a mall trap to, you know, get you to spend money. And then that generates sales tax revenue for the city that owns the airport. We can't do that because of where the airport sits. And so that's why privatization, just looking at privatization, is more attractive to a city like St. Louis, who is in this position, versus say Chicago or other cities, Atlanta, particularly what you've seen in New York, where like JFK, they have different operators that run different terminals and they compete against each other for restaurants and business. Again, driving up with the goal of driving up revenue, which then generates sales tax for New York. So those are my 3 points, and I'm happy to answer any questions of the committee.
All right, thank you, Dr. Hollins. What we'll do is we'll go through, and as we go through, members of the committee, you can direct your questions either to President Reed or to Dr. Hollins. And again, Madam Vice, we'll start with you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I honestly don't have questions right now.
because I am thoroughly digesting the bill. And for me, because I was so intimately involved in the exploration process, the bill is reflecting where we would have gone and been finished by now if it had not been such a onslaught to stop the process before we got the answers and got the public vote. So for me, it might have been a blessing in disguise, because I don't know if we would have come to some of the absolutes that are listed in this bill, but we were going to the public for their ideas on how to spend the money. So I don't have any questions. I just want to give that comment and also thank the president for making sure that the time and the due diligence was put to this process, because we are in trying times in the city of St. Louis. For those of you all who've been with me the whole time, I constantly talk about how you need to increase revenue for this city, or you're going to have to turn the lights off and move on somewhere else. You cannot have a city that does not have diversity in income, population, all of the indicators that you have for demographics of a city. You must be able to take care of your indigent. And if you don't have appropriate revenue coming in, you can't do that. So I appreciate this, and I will end it with that. Thank you.
All right.
All right, thank you very much, Madam Vice. We will go on to Alderman Vaccaro. Are we there, Alderman from the 23rd? Well, we'll give him a shot. We can come back. I'll go to Alderwoman Howard.
Yes, I have a few questions. For Mr. Hollins, did you say 2,100 acres is what's in excess outside the fence there in the airport?
So yes, 2,100 acres.
Okay. So
to give you a sense, I'm sorry, Alderwoman, just to give you a sense, we own land on both sides of 270.
Right.
So there's I've actually had the pleasure of touring the land. There are old neighborhoods that literally have the streets still in place with the houses gone.
And those were the ones that were removed because of the noise. Now, let me ask you this. Now, is some of that already leased by the airport, like the parking spot and those places, or are those privately owned?
Those are privately owned, but
okay.
No, this is literally virgin land.
Okay.
I mean, there's deer running through the land.
Explain to me, if we lease the airport, what could a private owner do with that? In other words, I know we don't have the money. The airport is very deep in debt. What could they do with this? And then how would we get the money from that? I just logistically, and maybe this is a conversation we need to have offline so that I don't absorb all the time of the committee, but if you could explain briefly.
So in a privatization, you can cut any type of deal you like. So you can say, City of St. Louis, we want 10% of all revenues off the top. And that can be from leasing the land, from if we develop the land, from selling the land, any type of rent that we would generate. And as far as what you could do with the land, office development would be huge. If you look at a lot of modern airports, what they've become, they call them like aero cities.
Right.
The concept you see more in Europe, but it's coming much more to the United States, where you build conference centers and offices. Because, for example, years ago when I was a consultant with Deloitte, we would hold meetings at airports, meaning, we have a project team that's from multiple cities. You find the major airport that had conference centers that was kind of equal flight distance from everyone, fly to that airport, hold the meeting there, never leave the airport grounds, and then literally get back on a plane. Or if you stayed overnight, there was a hotel on site, right? Literally is connected to the terminal. So think of hotels, conference centers, and office development. You have a lot of cities have started to build office parks adjacent to the airport.
Well, as we're learning, offices are going to maybe be a thing of the past, but I'll defer that conversation.
And one more thing
okay,
I wanted to point out is cargo.
Mhm.
St. Louis is well positioned to expand in cargo. We're in the center of the country. We have one of the best rail connections in the United States. All major rail comes through St. Louis. We have one of the largest inland ports, and we're 2 hours from everywhere. And so you could set up, international distribution that flies into St. Louis, unloads through a custom facility, gets on a truck, and can be,
Warehoused, whatever. Yeah. Okay. All right. I have a couple more questions, Mr. Chair, if that's okay.
No, it's fine. Please proceed.
Okay. How did you determine the disbursement ratios? In other words, how much goes into each one of these trust funds?
We did it based on just, what we felt like the need was for the city of St. Louis. I suspect that through these meetings and talking with each and every one of you and hearing from other members of the board, we're going to be changing those sections and changing the percentages of those sections. Like, for example, there's been one recommendation that we switch up and add a larger percentage to the transportation pool, right? So I'm looking for a lot of input from first and foremost, the members of the committee and other members of the Board of Aldermen, as to what they believe would serve their community best, right? But we did it on need, demographic data, and some of those things, right? Currently, that's what we did.
I guess what I would like to see is to see current funding levels and how we could impact those funding levels and where the needs are. I don't know if you've done that kind of analysis, and I just think it would be, I would like to see, I know we all have our own feelings about what needs to be done, which, I agree with, but I think we need to know what's already funded and that what would help supplement that. And I know it's kind of a shot in the dark, but at the same time, I think we need to look at what we're getting federally, what's being spent, because sometimes what we think we need, as we've seen in our budget process, we get the narrative is, yes, there's a need, but then when we look, the money isn't being spent.
Yeah. And that's
what I'd kind of like to know. I mean, I know emotionally where I'd like to see the money go, but I'd like to see the numbers and see, what's being spent and can we help stimulate that too?
Yeah. Well, first off, any of the funds that we appropriate through any of these trust funds, right? So it's important for the board to remember that we have these categories, right? And under those categories, there are a litany of things that qualify under those categories, right? We are going to be involved on a regular basis through appropriating those funds and assuring that those funds meet the mark, right? So this isn't just like one thing under those categories. And also, these are supposed to be new funds, right? They're not to be used as a replacement of anything else that's going on or anything else that has been appropriated for, right? Or that we already have funding for. These funds are to be new funds to expand on what we're currently doing, right? So we know, like, for example, we know our rec centers are in just absolute deplorable condition across the city. I don't think anybody has to visit any of them to know that they're major need of work across the city, right? Well, we're putting a certain amount of funding in those rec centers on an annual basis. Any funds that come from any of these funds would be in addition to what's already there. We know what's already there is not adequate to meet the need, right? This gives us a major tool in our toolbox to actually meet those needs, right? And again, the board will be intimately involved every step along the way, appropriating funds over, reviewing the audits to see that the funds meet the mark, seeing which programs worked and didn't work and all that stuff, right? And we are the closest contact to the people in our residents. I don't know about you, but the residents,
Oh.
well, I do know in the 14th ward, they let you know right away, right? So we'll all know, you know, what's working and what's not working, and how we should adjust what we're doing, you know, in the future.
Okay, and then one more, and this just for clarity, I think you've covered it, but if we choose a lessee and they leave the lease before the 49 years, they still pay us the full amount that they negotiated, is that correct?
Yes, they pay us day one, right? And one of the things, another component that we're adding to this bill that you'll see tomorrow, hopefully, is along with the $1.7 billion that allows us to pay off the, you know, nearly $700 million in debt and have $1 billion left over. You remember, we get roughly $6.5 million a year from the airport.
Okay.
Because we're grandfathered in is the only reason we're still getting that $6.5 million. Otherwise, we would have to rely on the taxes coming from the airport, and we get none of those, right?
Right.
So part of what we're also putting in this agreement, you know, if the committee approves this amendment that I would like to make, is the leasee would also have a provision that we, through profit sharing, we get an additional $6.5 million coming through the life of the contract. So what that means is that currently we're getting $6.5 million. So in perpetuity through the life of that contract, we would get the $6.5 million still that we're getting today. Plus we'd have 1.7 billion, get rid of $700 million in debt, and have $1 billion to address massive issues throughout our community that we all know exist.
Okay, let me ask you this, since you brought that up. I wasn't anticipating that. But if, in other words, I understand that's based off of the airport revenues. Is that correct? How many flights and so forth?
Yes. And
Okay.
we and it's the roughly we get that 6.5, 6.8,
Right.
but that's about it. We're not going to exceed that amount across these years.
So you don't think that if by turning this over to somebody that is going to manage this airport and possibly expand it, and, you know, say the city's going great guns and we're back to the capacity we were with when TWA and all of the big ones were here as a flight hub, we wouldn't get more revenue? I mean, it's just something to think about. I'm not.
Yeah. St.
It's
Louis,
not a deal breaker for me, but
yeah. Yeah. St. Louis County would see a massive impact where all this different, you know, additional tax revenue, people parking out there, right, and all that stuff. So St. Louis County, that would be a massive windfall for them. For us, depending on how we put that section in place, right, you know, calling for that additional revenue to come through profit sharing or whatever, however we structure it, right, where we structure it where it is still feasible for a private operator to even consider what we're talking about, right? But I think we certainly can structure it so that we can see that $6.5 million, you know, comeback on an annual basis through profit sharing, and if maybe they meet certain mark, it increases or whatever, right? But you know, we would still get the $1.7 billion at minimum. Again, the other thing to remember of this is at minimum. So this, we're saying that anybody that want to take a look, to even begin to talk to us, you need to put a proposal in front of us with a massive capital improvement plan to the airport, where you're going to invest in the airport, right? You're going to be able to have to show a balance sheet, show that you have the ability to do this. You have some track history of doing this and all these things, right? And you're going to have to come up with 10% down just to even have a conversation with us. But if indeed we choose you, you need to write a check of $1.7 billion day one. You have to pick up all legal expenses, all expenses that the city would incur in terms of even putting a lease together or reviewing what a lease like that would look like, right? They pick up all of those expenses, right? So all those transactional expenses, all that stuff is offloaded onto the lease E, right? Because they are the party that wants to look at that would desire to look at it, and they need to let us know that they're serious about it.
So I guess my thing is, I'm getting old and I'm looking at, lifetime income. 49 years, I won't probably be around. If I am, I won't know it.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
what I'm saying, I guess my concern is if this does take place, and, I remember the glory days of the city of St. Louis when we were, number 10 in population, blah, blah, blah. If we could revive our city to that effect, I would like to see some, I guess, benchmarks after so long that, if they're rolling in the dough out there, that we derive some of that income. Yeah. Some of the benefit, because inflation is the only thing we can count on here.
Yeah. And that's another thing. Thank you for bringing that up. So I know there was people saying, oh, what about, fees increasing and everything? So part of what we put in this bill is that you saw that, so that the fees will cannot outpace the the cost of living increase, right? So all of those things are locked down within the ordinance that assures that there isn't any price gouging or any of those types of things that people have brought up in the past.
But I think we need to look out for our long-term interest. If if we get an operator in here that makes a living, and we're looking, 10 years from now, well, those dummies didn't take care of us,
Yeah.
I just think it's something to consider. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
All right.
All right.
That's all I have, sir.
Thank you very much. All right. Alderwoman Hubbard. Alderwoman Hubbard from 5th.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I don't have a question. I just have a comment. I am definitely in support of this bill. I think it's a step in the right direction for us. I feel that if in fact it's going to go to the voters, we need to give them something that they could actually wrap their heads around, something that they can see benefit in, and seeing resources in their community come directly to them. So I would encourage everyone to support this bill. I know there are still some things that we need to discuss, but I'm in support of it, and I want to commend Mr. President for really taking the lead on this, and I want to commend my colleagues who sit on the committee who offered input as well. So that's all I have.
All right, thank you, Alderwoman.
Thank you, Alderwoman.
Okay, Alderwoman Murphy.
I said, look, some of my questions have been covered, but just a couple. No one's made us this offer yet, have they?
No, there were like 18 responses for when they put out the request for qualifications, and Gerard and those guys sat on that committee. He can probably tell you a little bit about that. But no, nobody's made us this offer yet.
It's a reasonable amount.
It's totally a reasonable amount, and I think Dr. Hollins can talk to that based on all the work they did when they were reviewing all the documents and working on this for the last year.
Okay. Yeah, and then Mr. President,
Alderwoman Murphy, Dr. Hollins is back if you would like him to answer that.
No, yeah, I just was asking Dr. Hollins if that 1.7 was a reasonable offer, and he kind of said that those numbers came up before.
It's a reasonable minimal offer.
Okay. Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you.
We may see a lot more than that, which would be, would mean more in all those trust funds and give us a lot of opportunity to address those issues that every day all of us throw up our hands, and we're trying to do our best to keep the ship afloat, but it's been tough.
Okay, and then was it my understanding that one of the first things we would do is pay off the airport debt?
Yes.
That we are currently, paying on continuously.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So that was good to know. And so now, how exactly is the leasee going to make this money that's going to warrant them giving us 1.7 billion?
I could talk to you about that
I mean, this may not.
I could talk to you about that for the next half an hour. I'm gonna let Dr. Hollins talk because you know, again, this is part of what they had been working on for a year. Dr. Hollins.
Thank you. Not to give away, you know, if we were to move forward with this, not to give away our bargaining position, but
Right.
the way I would present it to you is that most airports have brought things on site. So if you think about Lambert, you think about parking, right? So or you think about car rentals, right? A lot of the car rentals are off site at Lambert. Other airports, that's on site. So when it's physically on your land, you can generate revenue from that, right? Atlanta's airport built a separate terminal to house all their car rentals, right? So you literally take a train there. I think it's called the transit terminal, and all the car rentals are in that terminal. Also do things about as far as how you structure parking. You know, how do you optimize parking? How do you, you know, whenever you see like the spot or those parking facilities that are off site, that's lost revenue for the airport, right? What you want to do is bring that on site. A lot of airports have went to concierge parking, where you can like valet your car when you fly, things of that sort. You know, so offering more, not raising the price of parking, but actually offering more products that people want and will pay for, right? And so by offering more products and people like, you know, and that's a different market, but LAX, I mean, they have terminals for celebrities that literally they can fly into and literally leave and no one knows they're even at the airport, right? So a lot of times when you see those celebrity videos at the airport, that's because they want to be seen, not because that's the way the airport's set up. And so you can do things to basically create more products and services that people will pay for. And so that's how they would increase revenue.
Okay, thank you.
All around the terminal and parking and bringing things on site.
Yeah. Isn't there one of the airports that has like just a runway or something for like FedEx or
you might be
UPS or something?
Well, you might be thinking about Memphis. So Memphis Airport has a unique structure. So basically, the airport is a normal airport up until I think like 10 o'clock at night. And then from like 10:30 or something to like 4 in the morning, literally FedEx takes over the entire airport.
Wow.
They fly all their planes in, they unload them, you know, load them back, and then they fly out. Then they turn the airport back over to the city, and they pay obviously a large amount of money, and that's why Memphis has one of the like best industrial warehouse markets in the country because FedEx is there. And actually UPS, while they're not centralized there, UPS's headquarters is Atlanta's airport. So a lot of the growth you've seen in Atlanta's airport, which is the world's busiest airport, a lot of that started with UPS being headquartered in Atlanta.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all for now.
Thank you, Alderwoman.
All right, thank you, Alderman. I'm sure if we get the celebrity runway that Alderman for the 2030 would appreciate that.
I want that.
The cameras are always following him everywhere he goes. All right. Thank you, Alderman Murphy. Alderman Spencer, any questions of the sponsor or Dr. Collins?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Of course, I have questions. I'll start with the president. Mr. President, how similar is this bill to the initiative petition, the petition that?
Not similar at all. Our funds, our trust funds are for addressing these major systemic issues across our city. And the funds that are still left in our trust funds gain interest and will be distributed at the will of the elected officials, the members of the board and the members of the executive branch of government, based on the needs within the community. in that initiative petition, it goes to pay down their earnings tax or any tax that is on the ballot. So it would be held and go to pay down the earnings tax. It also would have to be all spent within 9 years. So if you don't spend it in 9 years, it goes to pay down the earnings tax. Massive, complete difference, right? In ordinances. And there's a host of other, differences in the two also.
The language seems so similar to me, but.
Well, that language, you show me where that language exists in my bill. I know where just show me, point out in my bill where we are sending our funds, using our funds to pay down an earnings tax. It doesn't exist, it's different.
Okay. Gerard, you talked about federal funding for airports.
Yes.
In the last 3 months, we've received a lot of federal funding, helping us, the airport, has received a lot of federal funding to help us get through the COVID. We were involved in this airport privatization program. Would we be eligible for those federal funds?
Yes.
The last I spoke to the FAA, they described to me that we had no mechanism of providing federal funds to an airport under this program. Are you sure about that?
That is my understanding, that because the airport, the ownership of the airport wouldn't
It's still the city of St. Louis.
Mr. President, could you answer that question? Because I think it's if we were engaged in this program now, would we be eligible for federal funding?
For COVID funding? Hopefully that will, first and foremost, God willing, we will never be in a situation where we need COVID funding ever again, right? Because that means that we've lost a lot of lives and we are not in good shape, right? So God willing, we're not gonna need COVID funding in 2022 to come to the airport. But the ownership of the airport remains the same. The FAA, TSA still remain the same. They still run the airport. They still provide the security and overall processes of the airport, right? The management company would include just the daily management of the airport and those 600 employees that would normally be City of St. Louis employees. But not even all 600 employees would go over to the management company. The City of St. Louis would still maintain control of their fire and their police. All would still be under the City of St. Louis banner, and we are the owner of the airport. So, so we would still qualify for those funds.
Mr. President, would you mind verifying? Well, we should. I think
I'll verify it for you. I'll verify it for you and get it back to you. But
yeah, we have a meeting tomorrow, so that if you have time to do that by tomorrow's meeting.
Yep.
Thank you, sir. All right, please proceed, Alderwoman.
The proposal here is for the City of St. Louis to participate in the federal program to allow for privatization of airports. It used to be called the Airport Privatization Pilot Program. I believe it's called the Airport Privatization or Investment Program now.
No, it is not called privatization. It's the Airport Reinvestment. It's the Airport Investment Program. They took privatization out of the title because people were confused, because when people hear privatization, they think, okay, you're going to privatize the airport, you're going to sell the airport, right? So it was a really bad title for them to choose, and they've rectified that. The Congress took it up and changed the name of it so that it's not called airport privatization, but whether it's called airport privatization or whatever it's called, right? People who read the ordinance and report on it, right? Who tell their constituents what the program is, should be responsible enough to truly describe to them that it is a lease agreement, right? And not let their constituents be misled by a title, no matter what the title is.
Thank you for that explanation, Mr. President. How many airports across the country are engaged or in that program?
Well, again, as we talked about when we started this, virtually all airports across this country, they are owned and they reside in the county that owns them. St. Louis Lambert Airport, we're not in that situation. So while we sit here and we carry the debt that was put on it by Vince Shamel with the runway to nowhere, we aren't receiving the benefits that they're receiving in St. Louis County, right? So we have to make a decision on if we want to better our neighborhoods and communities that we live in, and if we want to bring some real relief to them, or if we want to posture and play politics. You know, we're sitting here and we probably have more than 50 kids that have been shot and killed already this year, right? We have families living below the poverty line. We have homelessness issues, right? We need more affordable housing units and all those things that people ask for. Well, every last one of those things costs money, and they're going to take resources to do it. So should not we be responsible and at least give the voters the right to choose, the voters the right to decide what their fate should be?
Mr. President, my question was, how many airports of the 457 publicly owned airports that you pointed to earlier are involved in this program, which was just until 2 years ago described as a pilot program with the FAA?
Well, I think you answered your question, because just until 2 years ago was called what? A pilot program, right? So, and given the length of time that it takes to do these things, you wouldn't suspect that there would be, 80, 90, or 100 airports that are involved in it. But here's what I'll tell you. Nearly every airport across the country is involved in some type of public-private partnership, P3s. Why? Because the county that they reside in owns them, which means that they get the tax revenue by just increasing the taxes that are coming off of the airport. St. Louis City, we don't have that option, right? Unless we pick up Lambert Airport and move it into the city, every dime we put in it that increases revenue, that increases the taxes, are gonna go to help St. Louis County. So for most airports, it would make more sense to do P3s, which they're all doing. LaGuardia Airport, right? LAX, go down the line. All of the major airports that are just Atlanta's airport, go down the line. They're all doing P3s, and they're doing P3s because P3s increase the tax basis. And if it increases the tax basis, it helps them directly within the municipality because the airport resides within that municipality. Now, you understand that Lambert does not reside in the city, right? That's a question. It does not reside in the city, correct?
It doesn't. That's right.
So if it doesn't reside in the city, who gets the taxes from it?
Well, we are unique in that.
But who gets the tax revenue from it?
The sales tax goes to St. Louis County.
All right. Okay. So if we put a public-private partnership in place, like the other airports are doing across the country, who does that help?
Mr. President, the point of an airport is not to generate sales tax for its municipality. The point of an airport is to be the doorway to the rest of the world. And
oh my God! Well, that's well, I guess you can have that. You can have that view, but the constituency that has elected me, they would like to see some revenue come off of their airport. Every single airport across this nation relies. Every single city with a major airport in it across this nation. I ask you, go ask them to just give up all the revenue coming from that airport and see what they say. Well, and say it's just supposed to be a gateway and something that welcomes people to your city. Come on, all of them. Come on, all. That's a stretch. Come on.
It's an economic driver. It drives our regional economy. My question, I'll answer it since I've given you a couple opportunities here.
I've answered it for you. I've answered it for you.
On mainland United States that are participating in this.
Why?
Because there has only been one that has done it, and it has failed
No, that is untrue.
No, the
Alderwoman, that is
Even though-
wholly and completely untrue. And I ask you not to put just misinformation out there, but I probably won't be able to stop you from doing that since you insist that airports aren't meant to drive any revenue or anything. They're just meant to be a gateway to whatever city they're in. So we are philosophically in two different places. I don't know that we'll ever be together on it, but
Mr. President,
yeah.
The only airport that's used this program before in upstate New York, is it still operating under the pilot program, or?
Here's what I'd say to you. Midway Airport in Chicago, only thing that stopped that closing was that the market crashed, because it was during the market crash that happened. That's the only thing that stopped that closing. They were one of the ones that were able to finally put all of the pieces together and get it to a closing table. These are complex. These are very complex deals, right? And it takes a lot to get through it, and it's very expensive to get through these things from start to finish for a municipality. Just pick up and do it, right? So Chicago. Would you like me to answer the question? So Chicago got the, because you're leaving really important information out, but Chicago got through that. The only thing that stopped the closing was that the stock market crashed, right? And the housing market crashed. The world was upside down from one day to the next, and they weren't able to close. Again, please don't just gloss past the fact. Have you studied P3s at all?
I have. We're not talking about a P3 right now.
We're talking about a P3, because a P3 is a
airports across the country that are.
Alderwoman.
We are not
Alderwoman. I'm not gonna. Mr. Chairman, can we move on?
I asked.
What do you have a direct? Let's give us a direct question for an answer then, Alderwoman.
The question was, how many airports on mainland United States are currently engaged in this program?
And this, if the answer is 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, that would be the simple answer, I guess.
The answer is 0. We would be a guinea pig. My next question for you, Mr.
We will not be a guinea pig.
We would be the only airport on.
We will not be the only airport that has ever done this.
We're just having a difference of opinion at that point.
We will not be the only airport
that has ever done. The answer is 0. Let's move to the next. What's your next question, Alderwoman?
The next question I have, Mr. President, is will the consultants who are engaged in the process, the previous process, paid out of the proceeds of the lease agreements?
Under our agreement, if it depends if they're working with any of the providers, or if the city has any additional obligations to them based on the work that they've done, that's all still left to be determined.
Are you sure it depends, Mr. President? Are you familiar with the consultant agreement, which was signed on June 13th, 2000?
You broke up. The what now?
Mr. President, are you familiar with the consultant agreement?
Yes, I'm familiar with the consultant agreement.
St. Louis and Grow, Missouri, the entity that was paying for, one of the entities involved with paying for the signature gathering. The agreement I'm speaking to right now is the agreement signed on June 13th, 2018 between the city of St. Louis, Moelis, McKenna, and Grow, Missouri. Are you familiar with that contract, Mr. President?
I'm familiar with it, yes.
That contract has within it a tail period. Are you familiar with that tail period?
Yes.
That tail period describes that if at any time prior to the expiration of 18 months following the termination of that agreement by the city, if the city were to enter into an agreement that subsequently results in a transaction, the city will pay back the consultants. And
and that's I think that's completely reasonable.
And
I think it's absolutely reasonable to look
to pay back the consultants for the previous what they did to
Yeah. Why not? Why not? Here's the thing that you're missing. If I can gain $1 billion to help eliminate the Del Mar divide, you better believe I will give them their money back. The money that they spent, you better believe I will have no problem giving their money back. If I can eliminate $700 million in debt that Vince Shamel left us with, and then also $1 billion to go to eliminating the Del Mar divide and affecting the lives of people in our city. People who have to worry, who right now are worrying about whether they're going to be able to keep their lights on or not.
Mr. President,
Alderwoman, sorry, but when you're fluffing your pillow at night and you're going to go to bed and you're going to be comfortable, some of these families are worrying about bullets flying through their house at night. They're worrying about if their kids are going to make it home tonight, right? That's their worry. That's real. And that's the reality that families are living in every single day. And you're sitting here and you want to ask me, will I be okay to pay them back the money? If I'm going to get $1.7 billion and another $300 million in profit sharing across the length of this contract, you better believe I will give them the $4, $5, $6, $8, $10 million or whatever we owe them. I'll pay them back, and I'll happily pay them back, because guess what? I will be able to address these real substantive issues in the city. The time for playing, the time for politics are over. The voters deserve a right to have a decision. And you are one that said you wanted the voters to have a right to make a decision.
with all due respect,
So this should be an easy vote for you today.
Mr. President, with all due respect, what I asked you is if they will be paid out of the proceeds. Your answer was it depends. On what does it depend, Mr. President, or will they be paid out of the proceeds?
Let's make this easy. Let's make this
If I might
Alderwoman, let's
interrupt
make
you.
this easy on you.
Okay.
Let's make this easy on you. I support paying them out of the proceeds of 1.7, 2.7, whatever we get, so that we can afford, so that we can address these real substantive issues in our city. I don't understand your question.
Well, let me make a point here. Since we're not voting on this today, we have a meeting tomorrow.
Whether or not, according to
Okay,
the bill,
if,
the consultants will be paid out of the proceeds.
well,
It's
okay, let me interrupt and say, if we could
Point
find.
of order, Mr. Chairman, I can't hear. It's too many people talking.
No,
at
I know,
the
I'm trying
same
to,
time.
if everyone be quiet for 1 second. Since we're having discussion only today, the question that needs to be answered, and I'll ask Dr. Hollins to look this up and get an answer either later today or tomorrow, because we still have a lot of the members here to ask questions, is how will if the consultants will be paid back, and how will they be paid back? And we'll get an answer for that. We can move on from that point, Alderwoman, since we don't have a direct answer currently.
And Mr. Chairman, that depends on the tail period, right? Which
Okay.
is why I said it depends, because it depends on the tail
So
period,
if
and it depends on when we close on it.
And
So the 18 months
President, does your
takes place
bill
from whenever
provide
it's in.
for a timeline?
It depends on the tail period, and depends
Well,
on the
maybe
start
we can-
and
if
when
you-
we
Okay, so
start the
if-
contract. So,
Alderwoman, your point is
but
being.
I support them being repaid
Okay,
if
but
it
Alderwoman, your
gets
point
us
being made.
$1.7 billion.
All right, fine. But
Yeah.
Alderwoman, what you're asking is there a time period set in this bill? Is that your question?
Is, will the consultants who signed the agreement with the city of St. Louis on June 13th be paid out of the proceeds of the transaction?
Okay, and then that's the question.
I said it depends.
Here,
I understand.
It depends on the tail period.
Point of order, everyone. We don't have a direct answer. I would ask that we move on from this question. We'll get a direct answer.
I can
And
answer
then
that question and the amount that the consultants will be paid out of the
All right.
transaction.
Okay, we'll make a note of that, and we'll come back to that point, since this is, again, not a voting day. It's because we have a lot of members who like to ask some questions.
I appreciate
you-
that.
Okay.
I would like to ask another question. Mr. President mentioned that the Board of Aldermen will have a say along the way. If you could point to me, Mr. President, where in the bill the Board of Aldermen has any powers associated with the set of transactions outlined in the bill. Reading the bill, I see that you, Mr. President, have a lot of powers associated with the process. Where in the bill can you point me to, and I will read the section that describes the powers of the Board of Aldermen through the transaction process?
Well, Alderwoman, you'd have to go to the charter for that because Alderwoman, do you understand the appropriations process in the city of St. Louis?
This bill is,
Alderwoman, do you understand the appropriations process in the city of St. Louis?
I have a fairly good understanding of it, Mr.
All right, so what does the board have to do with the appropriations of any funds in the city? Please describe to me that process.
I'm the one.
Alderwoman, please describe that process. You asked, look, you asked, so I'm pointing it out to you as clearly as I can. Please describe the process of appropriations because you've asked me clearly an appropriations question about future funds. So I'm asking you, do you understand the appropriations process?
I'm sorry, Mr.
And if you do, please describe it to me.
I really don't
because so we can get to the bottom of that.
My apologies, Mr. President. You clearly do not understand the question that I asked.
No, you asked where does the board come into play with these funds? Because I said that the board will be involved all the way along the way. So we're talking. So essentially, you've asked me about the appropriations of funds. So I'm asking you to please describe to me the appropriations process.
Mr. President.
If you cannot, that's okay. That means that you don't understand, and I can explain it to you. But if you do, then just tell me right now, because so that we can get to the bottom of it. Because why would you ask that question when you know that through the appropriations process, the Board of Aldermen has to and will be involved, right? So explain to me can you explain to me in this bill where it writes the Board of Aldermen out of the appropriations process?
I would like to know where in the bill.
It's not in the bill because it doesn't have to be in the bill because it's part of the appropriations process.
Does the Board of Aldermen have any powers as it pertains to the
Alderwoman, do you understand the appropriations process? Come on.
I'm happy to answer questions under a different context, but in
no,
I am asking.
No, please, Lord Jesus, please. Do you understand the appropriations process?
Powers associated with the process.
You tell me why I would have to outline the appropriations process for funds that are clearly going to be appropriated based on the charter.
Mr. President, I'm asking you simply to tell me.
And I told you as simply as possible. Alderwoman, stop. All right, let's stop. This is serious stuff, and you're trying to make a circus of things. And if you don't understand the appropriation process, I don't know what to tell you.
All right, let's take this, this point. Excuse me, please. Excuse me, please. I don't have my gavel here, but what we need to do is you're wondering, I guess we have to ask legal. And we'll ask legal counsel.
The funds that are in here are going to be appropriated based on the appropriations process. And
please excuse me. Last time I checked, this is my committee. Okay, if I have some silence here from everyone, the question seems to be whether legally this has to be in the bill, how the money is appropriated through the board. So I will direct that to legal. If you're Alderman Spencer, you seem to ask if there has to be specific language in this bill as to how the money is appropriated through the board. Is that what your question is?
No, that's the question that Mr. President keeps.
Well, what is your direct question?
What is the role of the Board of Aldermen in the process outlined in the bill? The bill outlines a process through which the city engages with a private operator. My question to Mr. Chairman, or excuse me, to the President, the sponsor of this bill, is what is the role of the Board of Aldermen through that process? As far as I can tell, the board bill before us outlines a process that involves the president of the board and the Board of E&A throughout a process that it describes. The Board of Aldermen, as far as I can tell, is not given a role in the process. If there is a role and it's omitted from the bill or will be added later, I'd like to know about it. If there is no role for the Board of Aldermen through the process, I'm not simply talking about the expenditures of funds. I'm talking about the process of deciding who is going to be on the receiving end of a contract with the airport.
So, you're talking about
excuse me, Mr. President, because I want to like to keep the meeting moving along. what I would do is take this question and have legal, and we'll have legal counsel read through the bill and see if there's an answer to your question. And if we have to add language, then we will do that. Okay.
I mean, it's the look,
Question, Mr.
look,
Chair.
the anywhere, any bill, just as a practice and understanding of bills, any bill that we introduce at the Board of Aldermen, right, where that bill falls silent, the charter or existing laws take over, right? So if there's an appropriations process in place for the city of St. Louis, we don't have to outline the appropriations, and we never have, right? So that's a red herring, right? The board will also, part of what the board does also is confirm appointments. So this is an RFP committee setup, right? So we have RFPs all the time through the city of St. Louis. Comptroller has appointments, mayor has appointments, president of the board of aldermen has appointments, and the departments have appointment, right? And those people select that outside that vendor, right? Where the board comes into play is if we have revenue coming from it, right? Or any other issues that require the board's attention along the way. Let's say we do a SID, right? And we do a SID. So the appointments to that SID would come back through the board because that's already part of the law, right? So so that's the way ordinances work, right? To go down this rat hole is just a red herring and a distraction. And look, the alderwoman can decide whether she wants to support a measure that gives their voters a right to decide their future or not. It's just that simple. If she wants to sit on the sidelines and throw stones, she is free to do that also. But I do believe she's going to be in the distinct minority when it comes to that, because we have some real issues in our city, and our voters truly deserve the right to choose.
All right. Okay, thank you very much. Is there another question you have, Alderwoman?
I just want to clarify here. In the letter that the president of the board submitted to the FAA about a month ago, it states in here, and I'll read it verbatim just for clarity here, that the charter amendment here would broaden the powers of the president and legislative branch of city government to include the privatization process. And so what I'm looking for is where I see in the bill where it points to where the president of the board has expanded powers, and it describes those powers, and it does not do that for the legislative body. My last
Go ahead.
My last question, Mr. Chair, is regarding the airport itself. The airport is run currently by the director of the airport. Is that right? Mr. President, Rhonda Homnebergy, who is our airport director, say that she's done our airport has been performing quite well. Would you not agree?
I don't think. Now that's up to you. That's what you believe. I don't think it has.
You don't believe
in comparisons to other airports across the country? Absolutely not. Our big win last year was WOW Airline, right, where you can fly to Iceland. They lasted about 6 months before they left, right? So we are not knocking, by no stretch of the imagination are we knocking the ball out of the park with our airport. If Southwest Airline was not in our airport, we'd be in we might as well close the doors, right? That's the thing that keeps us moving. Depends on what you're measuring against. I'm talking about measuring against some of the top airports across the country, which by the way, to answer your previous question where you said, what role does the board have to play? And the reason I wrote that letter is because of what we're doing right here. The Board of Aldermen, each and every alderman, aldermen and alderwomen, if they choose to engage, they have an opportunity to put the language together and legislate a process so that we can give the voters an opportunity to vote on something real, right? Up or down, 60%. So I don't know what more control would you need other than creating the ordinance that would determine what happens on the back end of this. Now, if you're talking about RFP committee selection,
Actually, I was
that's
talking
the typical RFP committee selection. So
Mr. Chair, with all due respect, I was asking about the airport director. I wanted to know, where is our airport director in this conversation? And if we are going to discuss the future of the airport, we ought to have the woman at the helm of the airport who, in my view, has done an excellent job. She has driven airport activity that has far exceeded the economic activity of our region, and we have been performing way better as an airport than the majority of airports in the United States, despite what Mr. President has to say about it. So my question really was, where is the director of airport in this process?
we'll call her and talk to her about it. If you want to get her involved in it, please just call her and talk to her about it.
Mr. Chair. It's unfortunate that we haven't been able to describe the Board of Aldermen's role in this, or the role of
You're playing a role today. You're one of what, 10 people that are playing a role today. You're at the table. You're going to take a vote up and down on what you think about it. You're going to make recommendations for change. What more role can you play, right? You're playing a bigger role right now than the airport director that you just brought up. You're playing a bigger role than the mayor or anybody else in this process right now with the power you have sitting on this committee. So I don't understand what part you're talking about. If you're talking about in the future, the money ain't going anywhere unless you weigh in. You're talking about now, the bill doesn't go anywhere, and you have a say-so on what it looks like the Board of Aldermen as a whole, as an entity, not all of us individually, as a whole, as an entity.
So are you saying
if you make the choice,
our role is here in the legislative process and that's it? Or do we have a role after we work?
Oh my God.
Well,
I've explained that. I've explained that.
Mr. Chair, that
What role do you play in the airport right now today?
But silence, please, silence.
What role?
We're going around in circles. We're going nowhere.
President, to answer your question,
Oh my God.
through all contracts that go,
Wait,
in fact, half of the bill.
silence, please, silence. Okay, we're not here for personal arguments. You're
Yeah.
asking questions. We're looking for answers. We're going in circles here and getting nowhere. If you have a direct question, we have a lot of other members here. Is there a question you have beyond this point, Alderwoman? You're muted. You're muted. There you go.
Well, I didn't mute myself there. That must have been done by.
I can't mute, so I have no ability.
Unfortunately, most of my questions have not been answered. I will defer to the rest of the committee, and hopefully by submitting my questions in writing, we can get some answers.
Good.
The opportunity.
That'll be fine, because I have a couple of notes that we'll be asking legal counsel for, and we can move forward and get some answers. And we will have,
Thank you,
again,
Alderman.
we're not voting today. We'll be coming back tomorrow. All right, with that, we'll move on to Alderman Muhammad.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. President, I was reading Board Bill 71, and I do like Section 12, where it talks about minority participation. If you can, just real briefly, just for transparency's sake, can you go over that particular clause on minority participation in MBE and WBE contracts?
Yes, the minority participation clause, it starts on page 17 to maybe 18, the bottom of 18. And the way it works is in the third year of the lease agreement up to the 10th year of the lease agreement, minority contractors, and that's women and minority-owned businesses, shall not be less than 30% within the lease agreement. 22.5% of that will be African-American owned businesses, and 9% shall be women-owned businesses, and 1% shall be Latino owned businesses, and another 1% other, right? And that's just through the first 3 years. Then we increase it. So with minority and women-owned businesses, from the 10-year mark and beyond, we increase that to 45% participation, right? Mm-hmm. With at least 30% of it being African-American owned businesses and 12% being women-owned businesses, with 2% being Latino owned businesses and 1% other. And then the other piece of it is if the leasee does not meet those goals, does not meet the language within the bill, right? Then they will be penalized, and those funds will go into an account for minority and women-owned business development for the city of St. Louis.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. President. And I don't know if you know or if Dr. Hollins may know, but what is the current goals set for MBE and WBE contractors now at the airport? I'm sure it's not at 45%.
Oh, no, not at all. And we've even had to fight to keep minority-owned businesses in place at the airport. So there's a situation just this past year where a clearly qualified minority-owned business had been out there doing work forever, had gotten rave reviews, and they decided to try to throw that minority-owned business out to bring in another business, right, and pay them more than the minority-owned business, and then tell the minority-owned business they'd have to work for them, right? So it's things that are going on like that we're not seeing the growth in minority and women-owned businesses across the city and across the region, because these things have been just thrown to the wayside. But now in this ordinance, we would actually penalize them. They would have to write us a check, and we'd take that check and put it right back to assuring that those minority and women-owned businesses would actually have some support and would actually be able to get the resources that they need to grow their businesses.
So if they're not reaching this particular goal, then they have to write a check to the city of St. Louis, and with that check going to that designated trust that set up that minority. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Awesome. I have no further.
All right, thank you, Alderman.
Thank you.
We'll move on to Alderwoman Boyd.
Thank you.
Sorry, Alderman Oldenburg. I apologize.
No worries.
My pen was laying on top of my sheet.
All good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I certainly want to compliment the Alderwomen from the 14th and the 13th ward. They asked a lot of clarifying questions that I had. So thank you, ladies, on that point. I just want to make sure that I am square in my thinking, Mr. President. The minimum bid of any potential private operating arrangement would be a 1.7 billion.
Yes.
So in theory, right, the market being the market, there could be a potential bidding war, and not that I want my eyes bigger than my stomach, but there could be a much more meaningful amount of money even through this arrangement.
Absolutely. And I would suspect that we will.
My next question goes to a little bit of oversight, and in the oversight committee sections. I know it's in here, and I darn it, I thought I flagged it, but to the extent that the operator is not performing, what rights and remedies does that oversight committee kind of have to kick them out and say, hey, you're really not maximizing this, making a better airport. We appreciate the check that you cut to us, but we're in this for the long term, potentially for revenue share, right?
Yeah.
So what rights and remedies does that oversight committee have?
So part of what we're working on is a change to that section to put even more teeth in it, right? But currently, if they're not performing, right, we have the right to terminate the agreement. We have the right to re-enter. We have the right to also set out a plan for them to rectify the wrong, what we see being wrong. For example, if they're not meeting the goals as set out in their capital improvements plan, because part of what they're going to submit to us is a capital improvements plan based on their bid, right? So when these folks would give us a bid, they would give us the bid saying, this is what we would offer you to allow us to run it across these next, some odd years. But then also this is our capital improvements idea, and this is what we plan to do to grow your airport, to expand it, and to invest in your airport to make it one of the top 10 airports, right? And also, as part of this agreement, is that there's a clause in here requiring them to keep our airport within the top 10 in the nation, right? So as authorized, as reviewed by one of the standard reviewing agencies, I guess is the way to say it.
I'm sorry, say that last one, that last point to me.
Yeah, there are like various different standard reviewing agencies that review airports and rank them, right?
Independent agencies that rate airports.
Yes. So those agencies have to rank us in the top 10. And if we're not in the top 10 airports, then the leasee is, technically in violation, and leasee has to be able to show a plan to keep us in that top 10 airport. It's the reverse of the convention center. I remember the convention. We had
deal. I like it.
Yeah. Puts us in the driver's seat for a change.
Yeah. Okay. The other, thank you, Mr. President, for answering my questions. The other kind of statements I'll just make is that, I think it's prudent that we are proceeding with the onset of a public vote, and that the community has the ability to weigh in to something of this nature, and that the potential uses are put up front. I think that was some of the confusing nature of this transaction last time that was in the discussion, is that we didn't know what kind of deal potentially could get cut. This sort of just says, here's our minimum bid. Here's where we put those uses to work in our city. So that, I think, is going to be very, very relieving and transparent to the community discussion that's going to be invoked here. So I like that aspect of it. The other potential for consideration is, anytime you're dealing with a public asset that gets privately leased, we should be cautious, and we should ensure that, and it sounds like we have some time to, provide some comments. We're into your
absolutely
point, committee substitute is coming to give some more teeth to a section, just so we're in full protection, because there is some truth, obviously, to being one of the first movers in an arrangement like this, that we want to be as ironclad as possible and think of almost an academic conversation, think of what could go wrong and build it into this.
Absolutely.
And the opportunity to do that. And I appreciate that, that we do have the opportunity to do that. And, where you are philosophically on private-public partnerships, I think, is always going to be an ongoing discussion. But, I'll close, Mr. Chairman, with throughout the last decade or two, the Comptroller Office has always engaged PFM as the long-range financial planner for the city to give long-range financial updates. And not shockingly, the city's revenues are always lagging its expenses. We're an age-old infrastructured city, and it costs a heck of a lot more to run our town. And it's not an extraordinary impulsive decision to say, well, what's an asset that we have that could potentially be monetized to provide innovative sources of revenue? I think it's all should be on the table and worth a discussion. Constantly, those two studies that have come back over the last 15 years from PFM have said the city needs innovative sources of revenue. I wonder if we can achieve both. Let's look at how we can improve our airport, keep it in the top 10 throughout the country, and provide that innovative sources of revenue to which folks have dedicated the last 15 years of saying we need in this city, right? We keep getting the same little bit of blood from the same turnip. Now it's time to maybe take a good look with a public vote on the table for that innovative source of revenue while maintaining an airport that could be in the top 10 throughout the country. So I welcome this conversation and helping shape this potential opportunity. So I'll close, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you very much, Alderman.
Thank you all.
We'll move to Alderwoman Boyd. Are we still with us?
All the
Alderwoman?
questions have been asked and some have been answered. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you very much, Alderwoman. Alderman Clark Hubbard.
Thank you. No questions or comments.
All right, we'll go to Alderman Vaccaro. He had a bad connection. He sent me a text. You're in a good spot now, Joe. Are you,
Yeah, I'm
in
at
the
home.
celebrity runway?
I'm on my home. I'm in my room. No, just listening to all this. Couple of quick comments. One, a comment. I know Alderwoman Spencer wanted to argue back and forth. When it was going to happen in the first place, her big argument was it needs to go on a ballot. So I don't understand the argument, because now the argument's against it. I support putting this on a ballot, as well as I support the other ballot initiative. So I'm a little confused by all of her arguments. You know, I think some of these things, the public should have the right to choose. And I know she doesn't like that as an answer, but this is exactly what she was asking for before. I think we put it on a ballot. The aldermen that are against it talk against it. The aldermen for it. You educate your people. That did not happen on the alderman ward reduction. It was very unfair how that was done. But put it on a ballot the same way I've asked everybody about the residency. Put it on a ballot, because there's people that are for and people that are against. Let's put it on a ballot. I don't see the problem in it. And it actually goes to what Alderwoman Spencer wanted to do, which I agreed to when she wanted it on a ballot. I said, that's fine. Put me on whatever. It should go to public vote. And so I was listening to all this bantering back and forth and the political nonsense that was going on, and everybody's running for mayor. Maybe I'll throw my hat in the ring too today, and then I'll argue. But let's do what we said we wanted to do. I would ask Alderwoman Spencer to do what she said she wanted to do. Let's put this on a ballot. Let's educate people. And, you know, the thing about it, we can put our own personal thoughts into this when it goes out on a ballot. Whether you're for or against this, I don't know where I stand on it myself. I'm not really big on, I guess we were called a privatization, but whatever. But I agree that a lot of the things in the airport, from the food services to everything else in the airport, are private. They're private. They're on private contracts. The ATM machines are on private contracts. The phones are on private contracts. So, I mean, you know, at this point, I was going to just sit here and do nothing until I heard the bantering. I'm doing exactly what Alderwoman Spencer wanted to do in the first place. Let's put it on a ballot. Let's don't try to be political and say, oh, he's for selling the airport, or he's for, don't put out misinformation and lies and nonsense. None of us are for privatization. All we're saying, or at least all I'm saying, is I'm for putting it on a ballot. Whether I support the ballot initiative or not is up to me. It's up to the people in my neighborhood. Joe, yes, I will stop.
All right, thank you very much, Alderman. All right, Mr. President, my understanding of this need for this is that there is a ballot initiative that we understand is going to occur.
Yes.
They have more than enough signatures. So whether we want to or not, this will probably be on the November ballot. What you're proposing to make it straight is that maybe none of us want to do anything with the airport, but if something's going to happen to the airport, that the purpose I see of this board bill is that we will have some say in what occurs, as it's supposed this taking what the ballot initiative is. That's the purpose of this. We're getting into nuts and bolts of where the money will go that we would otherwise, you're taking a ballot initiative and the board will have no say whatsoever. Is that my understanding of a ballot initiative?
That's absolutely correct. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's absolutely
so I'm just trying to clarify for all the folks out there besides us, what we're proposing here is not that we all think this, let's get ready, you know, put the airport in private hands because that's the way to do it. Is going to be put to a vote. So what we're trying to do is
Absolutely
maximize the outcome of the vote. If it would go that the Board of Aldermen and the city itself would have some say in this. Is that correct?
absolutely 100%.
Okay. All right. I just want to make that clear for everyone who might have came into the meeting at a moment and just caught different snippets of it or whatever to make sure that what we're proposing here is just anything. So we are going to meet tomorrow. Is my understanding, are there speakers or anything you have lined up for tomorrow that wasn't present today?
Yeah, we'll make sure to get everybody to the list of everybody to you for tomorrow also. And also, Mr. Chairman, if you will, to all the aldermen, if you have anything that you'd like to see, changes and stuff, please let us know. And Alderwoman Spencer, looking forward to continuing our discussion. You know, moving forward so that we can come up with a good bill. So yeah, I think it's important for all of us just to unify at this point because there's something that's going to be on the ballot. We have to decide if we want our voices heard and something that reflects our values in front of our voters also at the same time.
All right, thank you very much. And Dr. Hollins, if you're still there.
Yes, I am.
Okay, a couple of the questions that came up, and if maybe you could look up and we have ready answers tomorrow as far as in regard to the consultants from the original initiative, if there's any language we need to install here about them, how their payback timeframes or such things, you know, and also to the involvement of the full board as this goes forward as in the appropriations of it, if we need to add any language to that and clarify that with legal counsel. Maybe we can bring that up tomorrow to answer the Alderman from the 20th questions.
Will do. Thank you.
All right. If anyone has any closing comments, I don't know if legally we need to adjourn this meeting or merely continue this meeting till tomorrow. Is there any legal advice on that, Andy?
You could just continue it if that's
I believe
easier.
we'll continue this meeting. There's no need to adjourn. No need for a vote. Any final comments? Till we meet tomorrow, 1 o'clock?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Madam Vice, please proceed.
I really think it's important that all the members of the committee, if you just take a moment and at least know all the different categories that are being suggested, because there might be one that you really have special interest in, and you may want to read that category thoroughly so that you can have your absolute input. This is critical. This is what I talked about the whole time I was sitting at the table, because we knew we needed to come to the public. But for whatever reason, nobody ever wanted to get to that point. They never wanted the public to know everything. Well, this is the time, and we have to make sure that we protect this city. We can't just have an initiative on the ballot. And I am really, really going to be supporting this. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anyone other final comments before we close? Okay.
We are going to continue the conversation tomorrow. And
Yes,
vote.
we will be continuing this meeting tomorrow at 1 p.m.
Okay, and save your emails from today to get on.
No, actually.
That's good advice. See y'all. Thank you.
All right.
All right, with that, we will close. We're all excused till tomorrow, 1 o'clock.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.